Assalamu alaikum. How are you all? Okay, what do you remember about yesterday's lecture? Like day before yesterday's lecture. That was what? Sorry? Historical background of Pakistan. Causes of 1857 War of Independence, causes of failure of that war, and what was the impact of that war on the status of unity between Hindus and Muslims in the Indian subcontinent. Right? Now, if I can recap that, we just studied that after the War of Independence, the Hindus started blaming Muslims for initiating that war. Right? That was one misperception which the Hindus created in the minds of the English, right? Secondly, they created All India National Congress as well. But then that All India National Congress was only taking care of their needs, like the Hindus' needs, and not that of all of the communities living in India, right? So that was another cause which created rift in the Hindus and the Muslims, right? And after that, what happened? I also discussed that the creation of Congress, it was on the behest of the Governor General of India, British India at that time. He was involved in that, and A.O. Hume, who was an Englishman, he was one of the major exponent, you might say, of and advocates of behind the creation of Indian National Congress. That is why we can safely say that Indian National Congress was actually created by the English people, right? By the British government, and not that it wasn't something purely indigenous, right? Now, what happened? The Muslim leader asked Muslims not to join Indian National Congress because Indian National Congress will not be able to protect their cause or to protect their interest, right? And it will not take care of their interest. They asked them not to join it. Now what happened? The partition of Bengal was also one of the things which we discussed when that Bengal was divided into two, Bengal and Assam, right? So it was beneficial for the Muslims, but because in the eastern Bengal, the Hindu, which was previously a majority in the United Bengal, now it was a minority living under the Muslim majority province of East Bengal, right? Living in that province, and it was not acceptable for the Hindus. So they agitated vigorously, and later on the British government succumbed to that agitation, and the partition was annulled in 1911, right? Another thing was going side by side along with that partition of Bengal. Now we will look into that matter as well. Lord Minto was appointed as the Viceroy of India in 1905, right? New reforms were announced in India. When he was appointed as a Viceroy, so he announced new reforms in India, right? And regarding election. So that now the Muslims started feeling that if these new reforms are supposed to be implemented somewhere in future in India, they thought that they should go and meet the Viceroy in order to present their demands. What do they want out of these new reforms? Because they were in the formulative phase, right? They were pondering over it. So the Muslims ensured that their voices are heard over there, right? So on the one hand, this anti-partition agitation was happening, so it convinced the Muslim that they cannot expect any fair play with the Hindus when they will be under the influence of Hindus, or when they will be living with the Hindus, having them as a dominant section of the society or the majority of that society. Now what happens in the Western democracies, that it is the rule of majority, right? If a majority wants something, the minority has to accept it because they call it the collective will of the society, right? But when there are two factions, poles apart, living in one society, then you cannot impose the will of the majority faction on the minority faction, because it hampers their way of life, it affects their way of life, you know. So that was one of the concerns in the minds of the Muslims, right? They did not trust Hindus anymore after that agitation, anti-partition agitation. They did not trust them. So what did they do? In order to safeguard their interest, they thought of meeting Lord Minto in Simla, and they went there and they presented their demand. It was a delegation, right? So they presented their demand or the Muslims' reservations about the future political systems in India or political system in India, right? It was a 70 members delegation, and it represented almost all communities living among the Muslims, right? And it was headed by Sir Agha Khan. Now, what were the demands of this Simla Deputation? They asked for separate electorate in the Indian subcontinent. In the future election, they asked them that there should be a separate electorate. Now, separate electorate, how many of you get this idea? Separate electorate. Separate election, what do you mean by it?
Separate seats assigned for certain communities. Separate seats.
Separate seats assigned for minorities, right? What do you mean by it? Somebody else should tell me. How can we assign separate seats for minorities? Yes, please.
Like Muslims should have separate elections and Hindus should have separate elections. Like in the community government,
One person at a time.
The minorities community should appoint their own leaders for their solving their own problems.
The minorities should elect their own members to the legislature. And how would they decide it? That on those specified seats, only the minority candidates belonging to that minority should contest with each other, right? And only the minority voters should be able to cast vote for them, right? So they would be contesting among the Muslims, you know, Muslim candidates would be contesting with each other on those seats, and then the Muslim population living over there would be casting vote for them. So they can choose the best among the Muslims, but the Muslim would not be in competition with the Hindu, because then under the majority rule, it is certain that the Hindus would win that thing, right? Because they are in the majority, or they were in the majority. So that's the separate electorate. They demanded the separate electorate in the upcoming political system, which was supposed to be proposed later on, right? So they were quite sure that they cannot assume, they cannot reach to power under the Hindu majority, and that is why this demand should be accepted. Now, on the other hand, the Congress was adamant. It was thinking that it is the sole representative of the all of the communities in India, right? And that is why it was not in favor of this separate electorate. But the Muslims, they wanted this separate electorate because they had seen this partition of Bengal and the anti-partition agitations by the Hindus, which was basically benefiting the Muslims, but the Hindus were against this partition, right? So then they thought that it is of no use to remain, to participate in political activities under the Western model of democracy, which is, majoritarian democracy, you might call it, right? So in this sense, that the beginning of the separate electorate may be seen as the beginning of the realization of the two-nation theory. Now here you can see that this two-nation theory, when they are asking for a separate electorate, it means that they want to impress upon the world and their rulers that they are a separate nation, that they are not part of that one nation, right, which the Indian National Congress is claiming, that there is one nation in India and that is the Indian nation. But that was not the case, right, because another nation in India living was asking for separate electorate in India, right? It means that the two-nation theory was being shaped in the Simla Deputation. Some practical steps were taken for the two-nation theory. Right, its final and inevitable consequence being the partition of British India in 1947. Now, it was, it is a sort of evolution. Two-nation theory, they talked about two nations in India. Now at Simla, they are talking about separate electorate, which means they are taking this two-nation theory concept a step further, right? But the culmination of this, all these struggle is the 1947 partition of India, right? It took the final shape, the ultimate shape was this, the current subcontinent, or you might say the subcontinent, which emerged in the political composition of the subcontinent, which emerged in 1947 out of the partition, right? What happened? The Simla Deputation was successful because the Muslims were strongly urged to protect their separate identity, whereas the British responded to their demands, as Lord Minto was anxious to pull them out of their political discontent. Now Lord Minto wanted the Muslims to be pulled out of this dissatisfaction, which they were feeling dissatisfied with the political scenario in India, particularly regarding their coexistence with the Hindu community. But out of this, another thing, the Muslim drew another conclusion as well, that whenever they are united and they present their demands are accepted. Now what does it mean? It means that the idea of making another separate political party to safeguard the Muslims' interest in India, that idea was in its embryonic phase, and now it was being shaped in the minds of the Muslims, right, after this successful delegation, or the success of the Simla Deputation, right? So then these were the things. Separate electorate were given statutory recognition in the Indian Council Act 1909. We will study it later on, right? Another thing, Muslims were accorded not only the right to elect their representative by separate electorate, but also the right to vote in the general constituencies, right? Like it is the case, like if a minority is living in a constituency, that member of the minority is allowed to vote in the general elections as well, for normal candidates who are Muslims or who might not be fighting or contesting elections on religious lines, but they are just contesting on general elections or general seats. So this is the case in Pakistan as well. This was the case, that the Muslims were allowed to have their say on the general seats as well, but on the other hand they were given the right to separate electorate, to separately elect their own representatives, right? It is kind of a quota system, if you are aware of what a quota system is all about. In addition, they were also given weightage in the representation. Now, weightage in the representation, this is a bit complicated for your level, but let me put it in simple words that, for example, if you need to pass a law from the parliament, and you need 2/3 majority in the parliament for that law, right? So in order to stop a constitutional change from happening, the opposition should also be having more than 33% or at least 33% representation against that constitutional amendment, right? But the Muslims population, that was not that much, to the Muslim population in the Indian subcontinent. If they were given, would they be given representation according to their population, their number would not be, the number of the representative would not be 33%, like that, right? So in order to safeguard their interest, the weightage was also given to them, that okay, your population is, let's suppose 20%, but we would give you 35% seats in the legislature, so that if you feel that your interests are threatened by some upcoming legislation by the legislature, the number of your representatives should be enough to stop it, right? So that is kind of a weightage system. Now what happened? All India Muslim League. Now we come, as I have briefly discussed, that then it was the idea of the creation of a separate Muslim party for the Muslims of India came after the success of the Simla Deputation. So this is that point which I have already discussed. Now what happened, a meeting was held in Dhaka in 1906, presided over by Nawab Waqarul Mulk, right? And resolution was moved by Nawab of Dhaka to establish separate organization for the Muslim named as All India Muslim League, right? So then in 1905 that was a success. 1906 it passed a resolution. The Muslim sat there and they passed a resolution to have their own separate party, political party, right? The most important factor of the establishment of All India Muslim League was representative government to be introduced in India. Now you just see that they had their demands for the separate electorate have been accepted, right? And the reforms were about to be implemented in 1909. They did not know that they would be implemented in 1909, but they knew that somewhere in future these reforms would be implemented. This new act would be given to India, and now they had made a political party. It means that they would be contesting elections under a platform, on a platform, or from a platform for the Muslims, specifically for the Muslims, under the new rule in which the separate electorate would be implemented. So the Muslims' rights were up to some extent safeguarded in the United India, right? It was a step toward that as well. The Hindu agitation on the partition of Bengal 1905 have confirmed the Hindu prejudice towards the Muslims' interest, right, and the acceptance of the principle of separate representation by the Viceroy in Simla Deputation, right? Okay. Now these were the things you might number these factors, different factors, which or these are some of the outcomes which the Muslim would get out of this Muslim League, right? This is it. Now just tell me one thing. If I ask you something about how do you link this with the services of Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan? Can anybody link this?
Sir, he was the one who stopped Muslims from joining Congress, and he gave the idea to Muslims to develop their own parties.
He did not give this idea, but he just stopped them and asked them to wait so that they are politically quite mature to participate in political activities.
He also united the Muslims together, especially with Urdu as like a binding foreign language for that.
What did you study after the War of Independence, the Hindi-Urdu controversy? What did you study in that? What do you get out of it?
He basically taught Muslims how to preserve and how to fight for their rights, and he also taught them that you aren't going to live here forever and they won't let you live here. So he basically developed a concept that you need to fight and you need to know your rights. Later on, you're talking about separate electorate concept, right? Like how do we link the services with separate electorate? So he told them that to preserve your rights, you need someone who can speak for you, who can stand for you, and that's it.
Okay. Okay, let me put it in simple words. If you remember, I have told you that the Muslims were comparatively less educated at that time. They were not willing to learn English out of their disdain for the English rulers, right? They did not do that. But as a result of the educational services of Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan during the past few decades, like 1867 and 1867, so almost 3 or 4 decades, Muslims were able enough to make their own political party, and they were able enough to fight on the constitutional plains with the Hindus, right? It was due to the educational services of Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan that the Muslims, in a short span of time, like a few decades, they have become able to fight their case on the modern lines with the English, and to convince the British that they are a separate nation and they need these rights. So they were talking in their language, they were presenting their demands in their terms, in the language and in the terminologies which could be easily understood by the international community. Previously it was not the case with the Muslims of India. So within those 30 years, you know, because of his educational services, he made the Muslims capable of getting something out of that turmoil in India, right? Getting something out of for them in that turmoil or in India, right? So this is, I think that the credit of the establishment of Muslim League, and later on you can even link it up with the establishment of Pakistan, with the partition, goes to the educational services of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. I think this can be easily linked with that thing, because without that the Muslims would have never been able to make Muslim League, and then, you know, the Muslim League guided them later on in the later stages towards Pakistan. So it would never have been the case had it not been for the educational services of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, right? So now I think we should take a pause, and we will ask them, please request them to play that video. Briefly about that video, this video has been taken from Al Jazeera TV, right? It is a very good video. Yeah, okay, you can do it. It is a very good video, right, explaining what is happening in modern day India, what is happening with them in modern day India, and now you can just link it up in this era of media. This is happening in India with the Muslims, right? The level of extremism by the Hindu extremist Shiv Sena and RSS, it is up to this level, right? And this Al Jazeera news channel, you might remember if you are into the habit of listening to the news, it was banned in India for a few months or a few weeks, I guess, a year or two before, right? In 2015, I guess, or 2016, it was banned because of these kind of activities, that it was bringing out facts from India, which were, you know, tarnishing the image of secular India. So that image is just apparent. Inwardly, it is purely Hindu society, and they are just doing it, right?
Training camps for potential warriors, sectarian troopers within a secular state. As minorities grow fearful of their wrath, are India's Hindu nationalists threatening the country's stability? We asked journalist Mandakini Garlot to investigate.
It's been 4 days since 150 Muslims fled their village and sought shelter in this police station 15 kilometers away. On May 25th, a mob of 2,000 heavily armed Hindus attacked the Muslim community in Atali, a village in the North Indian state of Haryana. The local Hindu community opposed plans to build a mosque in the village. When construction went ahead anyway, they took matters into their own hands.
देखो कैसा मारा है, देखो लील डलने हैं, कभी डंडे बरसाएं, पत्थर बजाएं.
Ishaq Nambardar has spent the last 4 days mediating with the police to try and secure protection for his community. For now, he and the other Muslim villagers are still too afraid to return home.
देखो मैंने दरवाजे से झाँका तो किसी के हाथ में तलवार, किसी के हाथ में कट्टा, मार दो, काट दो, इन मुल्लों को, कटुओं को मार दो. प्रशासन तो हमारे को यही है कि भाई तुम काम जाओ, शांति बनी हुई है, शांति बनी हुई है. प्रशासन के सामने ही जब वो 2-3 बार झगड़े हो चुके हैं, जिस दिन ये झगड़ा हुआ था उस दिन भी पुलिस मौजूद थी वहाँ पर.
आपको ये कैसे पता कि ये हिंदू हैं? कुछ नारे बोल रहे थे
वो हर हर महादेव और क्या क्या इस तरीके से लगा रहे थे।
Most of the Muslim-owned houses and businesses in Atali have now been completely destroyed. There's still a lot of police everywhere, the police and the paramilitary, there's barricades everywhere, still a lot of tension in the air. The police will be deployed here in unusually large numbers over the next few months. But the battle lines are now clearly drawn, and many fear tensions may boil over into violence again. Atali is not an isolated case. It forms part of a larger pattern of violence against religious minorities. In 2013, one of the most notorious attacks occurred in Muzaffarnagar, a town in Uttar Pradesh. That incident left 62 people dead. According to a leading Christian rights group, at least 600 similar attacks have taken place since May 2014, when Narendra Modi, a Hindu nationalist and leader of the right-wing BJP party, became Prime Minister of India. 149 of these assaults were against Christians. The rest were targeted at the country's Muslim community. The attacks, say critics, are being orchestrated by Hindu nationalist groups affiliated to the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh or the RSS. Prime Minister Modi is a lifelong member of the RSS. In 2014, its backing was crucial in helping the BJP win the election. Since then, emboldened by the result, Modi's most extreme nationalist supporters have routinely taken to the streets, using violence and intimidation to press their claim for a purely Hindu India. But this is happening in a secular nation, where religious freedom is supposed to be enshrined in the constitution. My country, India, has always been home to a diverse mix of religions that have coexisted in relative harmony. But the news in recent months has been pretty disturbing. Each morning brings with it news of fresh and deadly attacks against minorities and others who dare to question the core beliefs of the movement. As a Hindu, I also believe that they've misappropriated my religion, whose core tenets continue to be peace and tolerance. Most attacks on minorities go unpunished. But when the authorities do dig a little deeper, the finger of suspicion usually points to radical groups affiliated to the RSS, like the Bajrang Dal, who consider themselves foot soldiers in the Hindu nationalist movement. The group is well known for its violent demonstrations. Today, they are patrolling the historic city of Agra, where they hope to stop cows from being butchered. For Hindus, the cow is a sacred animal. Aju Chauhan is their fiery and controversial leader.
देखिए उन लोगों को ये सोचना पड़ेगा कि अगर उन्हें हिंदुस्तान में रहना है तो उनको गाय माता को न खाएं और हिंदुओं की भावनाओं को आहत न करें। लेकिन अगर वो लोग हिंदू धर्म की भावनाओं को आहत करते हैं तो मैं कहता हूं उनको इस देश में रहने का अधिकार नहीं है कि ये चीज़ करने की कोशिश करते हैं तो उनको उसी भाषा में उनको जवाब दिया जाए।
The operation to rescue cows continues late into the night.
उन्हें पकड़ के हम यहाँ धुलाई कर देंगे अच्छी तरीके से, जान से नहीं मारेंगे लेकिन उस लेवल तक कर देंगे कि वो कम से कम आगे गाय को पकड़ने से पहले 10 बार सोचे। इस हालत में करके उसको फिर पुलिस को दे देते हैं।
Tonight, their hopes are dashed by the arrival of the police. Authorities have kept a close eye on the Bajrang Dal ever since a similar operation turned violent 15 days ago. After his group attacked Muslim truck drivers for transporting cows, Aju had to spend a night in jail. But the crackdown has done little to restrain them. Bajrang Dal does not limit itself to ambushing truck drivers. Aju rose to national fame in December 2014 when he was accused of orchestrating the forced religious conversion of a group of Muslim ragpickers, an incident that was picked up by the national media and triggered a huge controversy. Since then, hundreds more of these conversions have taken place across the country. Like all radical Hindu nationalists, the young men of Bajrang Dal draw on the ideology of the RSS. The organization promotes these views at training camps across the country, such as this one in Uttar Pradesh. 500 students have spent the last 21 days here receiving training in RSS doctrine. They've also been taught how to handle weapons. Today, they're preparing to put their new skills on display at a military-style passing out parade. The RSS is notoriously wary of the media, but with a little help from Aju Chauhan, we were given access to the ceremony. ये जो RSS और बजरंग दल है उसमें मोटा-मोटा अंतर क्या है?
ये राष्ट्रीय स्वयंसेवक संघ जो है वो चरित्र निर्माण करता है। हम लोग स्वयंसेवकों को बच्चों को स्वयंसेवक बना कर उनको देश और सभ्यता के बारे में संस्कार देते हैं। और राष्ट्रीय स्वयंसेवक संघ जो है एक क्लास ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है। बजरंग दल जो है वो मास ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है। मास ऑर्गेनाइजेशन अर्थात जितने भी सड़क के कार्यक्रम है या क्रांति के कार्यक्रम है जहां हम लोगों को आक्रोश व्यक्त करना है, सड़क पर आकर के डेमोन्स्ट्रेशन करना है, प्रदर्शन करना है, उस तरीके के कार्य सारे के सारे बजरंग दल करता है।
The RSS has honed its ideology over the years and in Narendra Modi has found its most prominent member. He joined the RSS at a young age and rose through its ranks before becoming a successful politician. Despite attempts to publicly distance himself from the organization, RSS members believe Modi is a leader who will help promote Hindu supremacy. He has come under regular fire for his links to the Nationalist organization, most recently for attending an RSS conclave where, amongst other things, the country's foreign and economic policies were discussed.
The Congress has alleged that the meet is a violation of the Constitution and the government a puppet in the hands of the RSS.
The RSS is well known for its chauvinistic military displays, and they do so under a saffron banner designed to resemble the robes traditionally worn by Hindu religious leaders. As a result, attempts by Hindu nationalists to influence public policy are often referred to as saffronization. Amongst the nations that the RSS admires the most is Israel.
छोटी सी भूमि है फिलिस्तीन की, उस सारी भूमि को उन्होंने अपने परिश्रम के बलबूते पर आज बिल्कुल उपवन बना दिया है। हम देश के अधिकतर लोगों में नागरिक गुण विकसित करना चाहते हैं। हम सारे देश को बना लेंगे क्या? ऐसा भी नहीं है, बिल्कुल गलतफहमी हमें नहीं है। हम तो कहते हैं कि 3% लोग केवल हमारे इस विचार में इस तरह लाइनों में बैठना शुरू कर दें, हम सारे देश का चित्र बदल देंगे।
The RSS's growing influence within the government is a matter of concern for many political analysts in India. Gurpreet Mahajan is a professor at the Center for Political Studies. She's convinced that the Hindu movement is determined to have a greater say in how the Modi government shapes policy in the coming years.
You know, these groups have always been very close to the Bharatiya Janata Party. And so there is a kind of relationship between them, and they do work for them during political election processes and so on and so forth. So they have high expectation once the government, with which they are closely linked, comes to power. So they have expectations. We have yet to see how far they'll be able to go and what concessions they can possibly get.
Mahajan is tracking the developments closely and believes that the RSS will seize the opportunity to shape the minds of future generations.
that through the... There has always been a concern that if you have an ideological party with an ideological agenda, they may wish to communicate that through the education, and we are seeing the same kind of concern being expressed now.
At the center of the Hindu revisionist project is the complete overhaul of the country's education system.
Gujarat is a very interesting model. Many people consider the state a laboratory for the gradual saffronization of India's education policy. Hello.
In June 2014, the Gujarat government introduced a set of 10 textbooks for primary schools. They were immediately criticized for their biased interpretation of history and geopolitics. The teacher is cautious in front of our cameras, but a closer look at the content of her textbooks is revealing. Most lessons revolve around the idea of Indian supremacy.
For example, on page 22 of a book called Prerna 3, there's a very interesting story about how God created the world. He was making bread and he took it out of the oven too early, and that's how white people were created. The second time round, he left it in the oven too long, and that's how Negroes were born. The book uses the word Negro. And then the last time round, he learned from his 2 previous mistakes and took the bread out just in time, and that's how Indians were created.
The books were written by a prominent RSS member and ideologue, Dinanath Batra. Since the BJP was elected, Batra has been appointed to a committee making recommendations on the country's new education policy.
Mughals or Mohammedans, a sword in one hand and the Quran in another, they tried to convert Hindus into Muslims. But Christians did not use the sword. They used education. In our history books, there are no points to be proud of. So our glorious chapters are diminished and they are not in sight. So I want saffronization of the whole country and whole education.
Do you think each and every textbook being used in Indian schools today should be rewritten?
Yes.
Prime Minister Modi has repeatedly tried to distance himself from the more radical elements within the Hindu movement. He has also tried to crack down on his colleagues in parliament who have become controversial for their views.
मेरी सरकार का एक ही धर्म है, इंडिया फर्स्ट। मेरी सरकार का एक ही धर्म है, भारत का संविधान। मेरी सरकार का एक ही धर्म ग्रंथ है, भारत का संविधान। मेरी सरकार की एक ही भक्ति है, भारत भक्ति।
But it's easier said than done. Some politicians, like Sakshi Maharaj, appear to have built their entire careers around inciting religious disharmony. A lifelong RSS member and self-styled holy man, Maharaj is a hugely influential parliamentarian. He has been at the center of a political storm almost since the beginning of the Modi administration for his vehemently sectarian views.
मुझे लगता है कि जो इस राष्ट्र का सम्मान नहीं कर सकते, ऐसे लोगों को हिंदुस्तान में रहने का अधिकार नहीं है। रास्ता खुला हुआ, पाकिस्तान जा सकते हैं।
But Maharaj doesn't see his words as controversial.
मैं तो एक संत हूँ, भगवा मेरे वस्त्र हैं, सारे विश्व को शांति का संदेश हिंदुस्तान ने दिया। अगर कोई व्यक्ति मेरी बात की बोली लगाता है, मुझे गलत कहता है, तो मैं खुदा से डरता हूँ, इस दुनिया में किसी से नहीं डरता, क्योंकि मैं सच्चे रास्ते पर हूँ, मैंने गलत कहा ही नहीं।
His party might disagree, The BJP recently put him on notice for making statements that incite hatred. At a rally later that afternoon, he chooses instead to speak of Islamic terrorism.
अब तो मुस्लिम कंट्री दुबई की छाती पर खड़े होके नरेंद्र भाई मोदी ने सारे विश्व को दो हिस्सों में बांट दिया। मोदी जी ने कहा एक वो लोग होंगे जो मानवता के पोषक होंगे, जो मानवतावादी होंगे, जो मानवता के रक्षक होंगे, एक वो होंगे आतंकवादी होंगे, आतंकवाद का संरक्षण देने वाले होंगे। इन दोनों के बीच में युद्ध होगा और आतंकवादी मारे जाएंगे, मारे जाएंगे।
Maharaj makes no bones about his view that terrorism stems from the Muslim community. A message that also resonates within these walls where a very special camp is underway. It's barely dawn, but here in Bareilly, a small town in Uttar Pradesh, the day has already begun. First, it's time for the traditional Hindu prayer. Over the next 7 days, these girls will be fed a steady diet of Hindu values and inculcated with military-style discipline. So we're at the Durga Vahini camp for young Hindu girls. Literally translated, it means the army of Durga. Durga is one of the fiercest goddesses in Hindu mythology. Now this camp is open to girls between the ages of 15 to 35. After months of negotiations, we were finally given access to film here in June. It's one of many similar Hindu nationalist summer camps for girls to take place across India. Formed in 1991 with the purpose of empowering Hindu women and transforming them into warriors, the Durga Vahini, like their Bajrang Dal brothers, are also considered a militant wing of the RSS. Some of its followers have come under scrutiny from India's security forces. In 2008, one of the group's leaders, Sadhvi Pragya, was arrested and charged for her alleged role in orchestrating a terror attack on a Muslim-majority town in the western state of Maharashtra.
करो क्लिक, इमेजिन कर लो, कोई भी चीज़ें सोच लो जिस पे आप निशाना ले रहे हो। हमें हिंदुस्तान में सिर्फ हिंदूवादी लोग चाहिए जो राष्ट्र प्रेमियों अपने राष्ट्र से प्यार करें। और प्राय अभी तक यही देखा गया है कि जिस जिस देश में ये बाहुल्य हुए हैं, इनकी संख्या ज़्यादा हुई है, वहाँ इन्होंने दूसरे धर्म को रहने नहीं दिया। आप अफगानिस्तान देख लीजिए, आप सीरिया देख लीजिए, लेबनान देख लीजिए। ऐसे में इसलिए हमें आत्मरक्षा और अपने आप को इतना सक्षम बनाना होगा कि हम किसी भी मुसीबत से आगे लड़ सकें।
तो आप तैयार कर रहे हैं?
जी हाँ, हम उन्हें तैयार कर रहे हैं उस चीज़ की। आने वाले समय के लिए अगर ज़रूरत पड़ेगी तो मैं चाहूँगा कि ये लड़ें उनसे।
Over the next few days, the girls will hear many versions of that message. A message that with time becomes deeply rooted in their psyche. Most of these girls will be married in a few years, and Durga Vahini is determined to teach them what to keep in mind when the time comes.
पर जैसे आप ये कैंप को किस नज़रिए से देखते हैं? ये
हिंदू संगठन से, मतलब हिंदुओं को संगठित होना चाहिए, हिंदुओं की लड़कियों ने एक साथ रहना चाहिए, उन्हें वो संगठित।
क्यों ज़रूरी है?
क्योंकि आजकल तुम्हें पता ही है मोमेंट्स कितना मतलब वो कर रहे हैं।
कोई भी हो, मतलब ऐसे
मोमेंट्स हैं, क्रिश्चियंस हैं, ऐसे उनके भी तो अपने संगठन होते हैं, तो हमारा भी होना चाहिए। और वो मतलब कोई ISI संगठन सुना होगा आपने, वहाँ से पैसा आता है उनके लिए, हिंदू लड़कियों को मुसलमान बनाने के लिए। पता है, 1 घर और 1 लाख रुपए पता नहीं ऐसे कुछ मिलता है। और उसके बाद वो मतलब उससे फिर वो पता है करते क्या है, मतलब शादी की तो उसके बाद बच्चे पैदा किए, उसके बाद तलाक दे देते हैं, या फिर मतलब उसे मतलब ऐसे ही रखते हैं
शोषण करने के लिए,
मतलब उसका टॉर्चर करते हैं उसे, भेज भी देते हैं अरब देशों में, और बहुत मतलब वो करते हैं।
आपको भी ये सब कैसे पता चला?
हमें दुर्गा वाहिनी से ही पता चला।
Their words echo the beliefs of the men who are shaping their minds. Speaking to the girls today is Ishwari Prasad, a local leader with the right-wing Hindu group, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad.
बोलो भाई, किसी हिंदू को मुसलमान के साथ शादी करना या ईसाई के साथ शादी करना ठीक है, गलत है? अगर जानवर खत्म हो जाए, जानवरों का मांस ना मिले, सब्जी ना मिले, रोटी ना हो, तो इस्लाम धर्म के अंदर महिला को भी काट करके खाना धर्म में माना जाता है। हमारे धर्म में ऐसा है क्या? हमारे धर्म में ऐसा नहीं है। हमारा धर्म महान है।
Barely out of their teens, these young girls have already bought into Durga Vahini's ideology of Hindu supremacy. An ideology that remains disturbing for the majority of Indians.
But I think the bigger issue is that there are a large majority of people within the majority community who do actually see India as a democratic, secular polity. And they do wish to see different groups really coexisting peacefully in harmony. So I think some of the ideas they stand for may not really be even accepted by the majority community. So the society, I hope, will be able to put some checks.
For many Indians, the aggressive beliefs of the Hindu nationalist movement go against everything this country stands for. Moderate voices will need to be raised over the coming years if my country is to remain true to its secular spirit. Otherwise, our founding father Mahatma Gandhi's vision of an independent India based on religious pluralism could be derailed by the whims of an intolerant few.
So how was it?
Heart-wrenching. Heart-wrenching.
Yeah, and what did you find in this thing, in this video? Just imagine, this is happening in the 21st century. What would have been the case when, you know, it was in the 18th and the 19th century and the 20th century? What would have been the case at that time?
Sir, aren't we doing the same thing? They're promoting hatred for Muslims over there, and you know, after seeing this, I think no one, the one who's very patriotic, he won't be able, resist hating India as well. But so we are doing the same thing on the both sides. That won't promote peace or harmony anyway.
The thing is that we are not promoting hatred, right? This is a true picture of India. Hatred would be promoted if I said everybody living in India is wrong. He is doing it. The same video was criticizing, and the same video was made by a person who was Hindu. It means that there are people in Pakistan and there are people in India who are criticizing false beliefs kept by nations living in both these countries. But the thing is that when that nation is under the rule of Hinduism, apparently it is secularism, but now it is under the rule of Hinduism because BJP comes into power every now and then. Previously it was Vajpayee, now it is Narendra Modi, and who knows what would be the fate of India after the next election in India, right? So if they are providing patronage to these kind of ideologies, they are actually promoting it, and they are narrowing down the space for minorities living in India. And it was the case. The point which I wanted to make is that it was the case previously as well. They would be they were telling that it's secular, the ideology of Congress is secular, but it was safeguarding the interests of Hindus, not that of Muslims. Now they are telling that they are secular. They are again doing the same thing under the umbrella of secularism, which is not secularism. So they are in a sense deceiving the minorities living in India with their diplomacy, and inwardly they are involved in a very dirty business, which is the creation of or the promulgation of hatred. How many of you believe in the last statement where the young girl was saying that if the Muslims do not find any food, they cut their women? How many of you believe in it? No one. But this thing is being indoctrinated to them. So this hatred is given patronage by the RSS, by the Bajrang Dal, by the people who are ruling the affairs of India. So how can we expect that if this is happening in this era, and they are quite bold by expressing these views on media, in front of media. It wasn't recorded, it wasn't a hidden camera, you know, they had got permission and they were recording it, and they were telling it on international media. Like, they are quite emboldened and they believe in this thing. So if they are believing in something wrong, this is a kind of fascism. Do you know what is fascism? Fascism was an ideology which ruled Europe during the interwar period between First World War and the Second World War. It was in Italy, and it was in another form it was in Germany, and then, you know, it led the world to the Second World War, and that was fascism. They were not approving of any kind of disagreement with them. This is the same case with India. If the same extremist mindset is presented in any other country, we would be criticizing it, because we all stand for pluralism. The respect for the difference of opinion should be there in any society. Why do we think that the United States of America is a good country? Because every minority or every religion is given proper respect over there by the community. But over here they are working on a community, an illiterate community, and they are indoctrinating them. When they grow up, what would these girls teach to their children? You know, so everything is quite messed up over there. The main point is that if it is the case today, how can you think that it would not have been the case previously? You know, in this era of media, if this is the case, then it was, I'm quite sure, I'm like convinced, you know, from my core, that previously they have been doing atrocities with Muslims, and whatever we read in the history books, you know, with the neutral perspective, when we look towards it, I think that their 90% narrations are true. They are not fabricated regarding the atrocities committed against the Muslims, right? So this was the main point, and this ideology prevails over there even right now, and it was there, and that is why the partition of India was made. India was partitioned.
This way, because I've spent like 3 or 4 years with Indians over there, and you know, there are people who still believe, you know, we used to sit together, we used to eat together, even though they're vegetarians. So I don't think there's only a specific section of them who think this way.
Exactly.
Others are really nice.
Exactly, but then that specific section is quite dominant.
It's in the government.
You know, it's in the government and it's quite dominant. If you are listening to the news every now and then, you hear some news coming out from India which is against the Muslims, like they were stopping these vehicles searching for cow meat, right? And this is true even in 2017. That was 2015, but this is true in 2017. A few days back, I think they just killed a few Muslims over such kind of petty issues.
Sir, the hypocrisy is that India is the biggest meat exporter in the world, but yet in their own country they will find and lynch Muslims for it.
Yeah. So this is hypocrisy, and if we see this kind of attitude in any other country, we will criticize it. You know, there are now, just imagine how vigorously the whole nation of Pakistan is criticizing the religious extremism in Pakistan. Everybody is criticizing it. The government, the media, the common people on the street, everybody is criticizing it. Like, we are not allowing them to flourish in the society and indoctrinate the young minds against the non-Muslim communities. We are not allowing them, we are criticizing. The press is full of their criticism, the media is full of, the government is full of criticism. We in the classrooms, when it comes to discussing discussion on these kinds of issues, we openly criticize it, you people openly criticize it, right? So that thing is not there in India. They are silencing people. They do not approve of this kind of criticism on the state level. How many, you know, there was 1 or 2 weeks ago, a famous journalist in Calcutta, in Bangalore, she was killed, right? And she was just a secular person promoting the secular values of India, and her voice was silenced. She was a famous journalist. That is why we know about her. There are many incidents in this current government in India about the killing of journalists, and that killing is done by this RSS or this Bajrang Dal, any other extremist Hindu organization, you name it. These things are done by them, and the government doesn't say anything to them. So
One of the famous Indian actors, he, it is said that it was said that he died naturally, but now it is in the news that he was killed.
because yeah, it's a conspiracy theory, you might call it, but he was supporting the stance of Pakistan, and yeah, exactly. So they do not approve of these things. Just think about the fate of the Pakistani cricket players who were playing in the IPL. They asked them not to come to India. You cannot play. Then think about the Pakistani actors and actresses. They were performing in Bollywood movies. They stopped them not to come to India.
Document that it is regarding the Pakistan and Indian cities, and they're still not playing even after having signed that document.
Yeah, so the main point, I think I have done my job. The main point over here is that if today this thing is happening and nobody is able to stop them, who would have been able to stop them at that time? So that was the thing which created the feeling of separate nationality or nationalism in the Muslims at that time. Then that was this Hindu psyche was one of the root causes of two-nation theory for the Muslims. And then the same psyche, Muslims gave them a lot of chances. You should keep it in mind. Quaid-e-Azam, he was advocate of Hindu-Muslim unity. He was given the title by Ambassador of Hindu-Muslim Unity in Lucknow Pact, 1916, right? Later on, he was one of the strongest advocates of Pakistan after the Lahore Resolution. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, initially he was advocate of the Hindu-Muslim unity. After the Hindi-Urdu controversy, he changed his views about this unity, right? Now what changed the mind of Quaid-e-Azam or the minds of the Muslims at large? These were the leaders. Leaders are convinced, they are visionary, they are convinced. Then they propagate their ideas. The masses are converted later on. The masses buy their ideas quite late, right? What was the turning point for the masses of India, which convinced them, the Muslim masses, which convinced them that they should have a separate homeland? Yes.
Sir, when Gandhi said that there's only two parties that are going to be considered, the British and the Hindus, that's when that was the final vote for Quaid-e-Azam.
Yes, these are again, ideas of the leaders. They are absorbed quite late in the masses. Normally the masses change their minds when they see something. The leaders see them, quite ahead of time, but the masses cannot see that. The masses change their mind according to my view and according to the views of, I'm buying the views of many prominent historians. That was the Congress rule in 1937 and 39, the Congress rule in India. They just won election in 1937 and they ruled India up till 1939, right? And their mandate was for more than 2 years, but they wanted to use their pressure tactics when the Second World War started. They tried to put some more pressure on the British government to accept their demands, and they, as a protest, they resigned. When they resigned, the British accepted that resignation, and the Muslim, when they were suffering, they had been suffering for 2 years, so they were they just celebrated or observed a day of deliverance. Quaid-e-Azam asked them, Yom-e-Najat, day of deliverance should be there. So these 2 years rule in India by the Congress, it convinced the Muslim masses that they cannot coexist with Hindus in united India. That was the last chance for Congress or Hindus in India, right? Before that, many chances were given, but they did not avail these chances, and even up till date, the same psyche is prevailing, right? So how can we think that separation of Pakistan, or partition of India should not have happened, right? How can we think about it? It was something logical, it was something which was evolving, and it was the final act of that evolution that in 1947, right? I think we do not have got enough time for your presentations today. I thank you all. Thank you very much.